I was telling Brother Tommy and David as we were walking back up here, I maybe should have told y'all this earlier. The more I eat, the longer I preach. Maybe in for a long time, huh? That was so good. The Mexican cornbread is one of my favorite. Oh, I loved it. And yes, I did get 2 pieces and some other things too. It was so good, but not as good as the precious fellowship, your sweet and kind comments. You know what the word octogenarian means? Octogenarian. What does it mean? 80 years old. Well, this 80-year-old octogenarian is going to take the memories of today and live on them a while, and you have made them sweet. I love this book. I've had it recovered 3 times already. We now do that. It's Sain Publications. It's not a commercial, but you can go to sainpublications.com and find things that we have. But in recent months, I've been over here in the Old Testament. About a year and a half ago, I started a series there at Cedar Grove where I regularly preach called The Greatest Story Ever. I started in Genesis, and we've been walking through the whole Bible. I'm now to the life of Christ on earth after a year and a half. But so much of what we found in the Old Testament led up to Christ. The prophecies, over 300 prophetic statements were made about Jesus, and they all came true. But there's something that has somewhat puzzled, boggled my mind. In a study, when you start at the beginning and kind of walk through, you see time and again, people would be right with God. They'd kind of fall away. They'd get further away. They would get in despair. They'd cry out to God for deliverance. God would hear them. God would bring them back, bless them richly. Then they began to fall away again. Time and time again. I know it's almost unkind for me to even say, why didn't they learn? Why didn't they learn from those that had gone before, the mistakes that they had made? Many of them lived through maybe more than one of those cycles. We can read in Joshua 24, Joshua gathered all the people together, all the leaders, all the powers that be. He rehearsed with them what God had done. And then Joshua said, verse 15, choose you this day whom you will serve. The gods back before where your fathers lived. The gods of those in the land in which you live at this time. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And they did. That's Joshua 24, beginning in verse 15, going down through the end of the chapter, verse 30. And as you segue on into the book of Judges, chronologically it follows, as well as in the Bible, Joshua Judges. You can read in the book of Judges in the first couple of chapters, almost verbatim, word for word, some of the words that are found in Joshua 24 that's also found in Judges chapter 1. Moses, my servant, is dead. And then he spoke about how that Moses was such a powerful individual, an influential one. And the people that followed after Joshua, Moses, others, even the elders continued faithful. Well, that's different. That's nice. That's wonderful. That's encouraging, uplifting. Then you come to chapter 2. In Judges chapter 2, again, you find some of the same terminology about what had happened and who followed who, until you came to Judges 2 and verse 10. And it says, "And there arose a generation that knew not God." That is a terrifying statement. I am so proud to have been back today to see Hardin Church of Christ, the way you conducted your worship service, your prayers, the Lord's Supper, walking down the hallway downstairs, seeing the classrooms, and impressed with so many things that you're faithful in. But as a nation, as a people, not so much so. Look at America. My dad moved here in 1953, moved away from the Union Hill Church for a while, came back, and I was here in 60, 61, 62. But from that era, 60s, look what has changed to now the 2026 in which we live. The immorality, the ungodliness, the crime level, even politically, and how so many things have fallen far, far away from God. We put our trust in ourselves. Think, look at me, here's what I have done. Here's what I have accomplished. Here's the land and all the portfolio that I have. Hold all of that thought for a minute to one side, and now let me go over here and begin another thought. I don't know why necessarily, but for years, I have been captivated, mesmerized by a tragedy that happened over 100 years ago. I understand one of your speakers spoke about it last week. I'm talking about the Titanic. I think I have every movie on video, VHS tape, by the way. I have every coffee table type of book. I've researched and looked and tried to learn every possible lesson. For some reason, it just captures me. But taking the old law, the Old Testament, the history that we find there, and segueing it to today, and then looking at the Titanic and blending them all together. I've got some stats written in my Bible that I just wrote down about it. It's 882 and a half feet long. Had a triple screw, 3 engines, 50,000 horsepower. Could go up to 25 miles an hour. Over 3 million rivets held that ship together. Took over 3 years to build. 46,000 tons. The maiden voyage was a phenomenal. Southampton, England. There was over 100,000 people that came to see the maiden voyage, the launch. It was a big event. The Star Lines had advertised it somewhat discreetly at first, but then it became kind of a snowball going downhill effect, and it became known as the unsinkable. Can't be sunk. The mere construction of it had different sections in the lower part of the ship, 16 different sections, and bracing up between the individual sections, and they thought, well, if even water gets in it, they won't be able to go up over the top section, so it's unsinkable. The 1-inch thick steel, best that it could be bought at that time, 1912. The construction was really so significant that they even had many people, as it were, come by just to see it under the building stage. The world at that time, a lot of discoveries, railroads, steam engines, airplanes. Wealth was abounding. There was 3,800 millionaires that lived at that time. I understand that from Elon Musk, and he's now had 4,000 millionaires as a result of his sell-off. One little incident. There was only 3,800 then. But they were so proud that they wanted to be there to take the maiden voyage from Southampton to New York, and they had already advertised it was going to be at breakneck speed. They would get there in less time than any ship had ever traversed the ocean. So many of the rich went all the way over there just to be on the Titanic. The Guggenheims, various ones, the one that started Macy's was on that ship. The Strausses, just to be there. I don't have to go into the details of how it sunk. You know that far too well, probably. An iceberg. But I will tell you a little bit about an iceberg. Do you know that on the average, only about 1/10 is above the water? 90% of it is underwater. When I started this journey of trying to find out some facts about it, I thought, ice sunk a big 46,000 ton ship? Yes. It's estimated that probably the iceberg itself weighed 20 times more than the Titanic. But then the preacher in me got thinking, okay, what lessons can we learn? And in our brief devotional today, I want to share with you this. At times, we get to be a little on the cocky side, arrogant, overconfident. They were. How dare somebody say, God can't sink this ship? Well, that's what they said. I would almost, in retrospect, look at the great history that we have here and say somebody's saying that, God's going to sink that ship. I'm not saying that God put the iceberg there. I'm not saying that God did it at all in any way. But I'm just saying how arrogant and cocky for us to even begin to think of saying to God, you can't do that. They only had 16 wooden lifeboats. Each would seat somewhere around 40 or 50. Some of them left the Titanic boat with only 20 some odd, 16 or 18 on one of them. The reason they didn't have any more than 16, they planned for 64 to begin with, but they said, we don't need that. This thing's unsinkable. What do we need lifeboats for? So they enhanced the suites to make them even more luxurious. Oh, food? 43 tons of meat and fish, 40 tons of potatoes, 1,500 gallons of milk, just to name a few. They were going to eat well, and they did for a time. They didn't even think twice when they were warned about icebergs from other ships in that area by way of the telegraph. They didn't think there was any need for slowing down. They were more interested in breaking a record, getting to New York at a quicker time than ever before. So lesson number 2, after our not being overconfident, let's not ignore the warnings. What I read to you this morning from 2 Timothy 3rd chapter and 4th chapter, I could have elaborated more, especially on the third one. Paul said, perilous times. And all of the things that he mentioned in the 3rd chapter. And then in the 4th chapter, when he spoke about how preach the word, because there's going to be those that will not heed or endure sound doctrine anymore. You see, God was warning us about that. God was telling us, for an example, that there's going to be religions. He didn't say it this exact way. I'm paraphrasing it. There's going to be religions that's not going to let some people marry and not eat certain kind of meats on Fridays and stuff like that. He warned us. But even as plain as that is, as a people, we ignore that. There are going to be those that bring commandments and doctrines of men. That's what Jesus said in Matthew 15, verse 7 and 8, when he said, in vain they do worship me, teaching for doctrine. In vain, worthless, of no value whatsoever, they're worshiping, but it's because they're doctrines and commandments of men. God warned us. God told us in the beginning of the Bible in Deuteronomy, also in the middle of the Bible in Proverbs, and also at the end of the Bible in Revelation, don't add to or take away from the Word of God. God meant what He said when He said what He said. Don't add something else to it. Don't take something away from it. You just take it, face value. Heed the warnings. But it gets even worse with the Titanic when I tell you that 6 different telegraph messages at 1:42 and 1:45 from the Corona and also the Americana, the Californian at 7:30, the Rappahannock at 9:40, before they collided with the iceberg at 11:40. Each of those warnings by way of telegraph came saying, significant caution, be aware, icebergs are in the route where you're going. Did they just shrug their shoulders? Did they arrogantly think, it ain't going to bother us? We're the Titanic, folks. They were close enough, yet just far enough away that the other ships on the ocean couldn't get to them in time. Those that had tried to warn them. But there's another little tidbit of information that I read, and I'm trusting a lot of authors to have rendered it accurately. Businessmen that were on there, these executives that own these corporations, millionaires, I mean the wealthiest of the wealthy, and they were on the Titanic, but they had to also conduct business. It'd be like my daughter coming down to the publishing business with her little laptop, and she owns a real estate company, and she sells properties while she's down there playing around at our place, had to do business. But it got so serious with these millionaires that they were wanting the telegraph, wanting their messages sent, wanting to reach their clients or whoever it was, that they would tell the ones that were telegraphing them about the warnings, don't bother us. Leave us alone. Tragically, they did. The one actually that was the closest to them, Californian, 58 miles away from where the iceberg struck the Titanic, was one of the ones that they had said, leave us alone. So they turned their telegraph off, and thus unable to receive help. We've hit an iceberg. They focused on trivialities, something of no consequence or importance at all in the great scheme of things, and made that tragic mistake that caused hundreds and hundreds to die. Another significant thing that I love to emphasize, they were defiant, as it were, disrespective of when the iceberg had actually hit the Titanic. Unbelieving. No problem. It was a matter in which basically some of them even said, according to some of the survivors that told the story after it's over with, well, they heard a noise, a scratching noise, and they did feel a little bit of the list of the boat after that when the water was already going in. But they kept dancing, they kept playing cards, they kept listening to the music and rejoicing. And even when encouraged to put on life vests, they didn't want to mess up their nice, beautiful clothes. And besides, it was 28 degrees in the water outside, 32 in the temperature of the air, and they didn't want to go out there, and they knew, well, that's nothing to it. If we even went out on the boat, we'd come right back, no doubt. This morning, as I closed the sermon and spoke about paradise and torment, our Lord has given us the information of the choices. It's one or the other. Warnings. Betty is a very common name. A lady with the first name of Betty up in St. Louis, Missouri, when we lived there in the 70s and 80s. When one of the elders and I went to see her, she was in a bad relationship, knew that she was wrong, absolutely didn't care. And she looked me and Steve straight in the eye and said, I don't care if I die and go to hell, I'm going to stay with him. My dad was on, WCBL, and if that's still there, I think that's what it was. I've been on radio and television at different times. And with any use of the vocabulary that I could summon to make a pleading exhortation, believe in God, trust God, follow God, obey God, stand before God one day and hear him say, well done. But if you reject God, disrespect him, refuse to submit to him, you're ignoring the warnings. You're defiantly, foolishly not listening to what could happen. I made mention this morning several things that happened to our family. In Jackson, Missouri, our house burned on a Saturday morning. LaDonna and I were at the church building with others starting an evangelistic program. We'd left the girls. Best I remember, a 16-year-old teenage boy, one of our foster children at that time, too, at the house 3 blocks away. Teenage boy bursted through the door there where we were meeting and said, Brother Sain, your house is on fire. LaDonna was pregnant with Heather at that time. She jumped a 8-foot table to get out the door, and we got in the van and drove there, and police were already there, cordoned it off. Fireman was already slamming water in through the windows of the house. It was fully engulfed. When the teenage boy came through that door, he said, your house on fire. I didn't say, I don't believe that. We got a meeting. We got to finish this study. You know I didn't do that. When we got down there to the house and we saw, but I knew the children are inside. I'm told in hindsight that it took a couple of policemen and a fireman pressed me to the ground to keep me from going in because I knew they were there. The neighbor come rushing up to us and said, your children are out here in my van. So I knew they were okay. But then Stephanie Michelle, the first child that we had, lived only 6 weeks, buried in memory garden in Benton. The only pictures we had was right inside the door, about 4 feet. And I had to go in and get that end table with those pictures. They wouldn't let me. Again, think of how unbelievably, unimaginably it would have been if I'd have said, well, it doesn't really matter. The kids are in there, or pictures that don't really matter. I mean, it's just. But that's the nearest thing that I can use to compare the Titanic folks ignoring the warnings, or us not hearing the warnings from God. But I want to pose these questions as I wind this up. Do we today truly hear the warnings that exist around us? Do we listen? Do we take action? I know at my age, I don't have maybe a long time to live, but some of you are much younger, but you don't have any guarantee of your life either. You've got to heed the warnings. You've got to hear the exhortations. You've got to make sure and listen. And somewhat of a crude parallel, you've got to get in the lifeboat. Some of them refuse to even get in the lifeboat. They want to stay back. Don't want to mess up their clothes. It's cold outside. We today got to get in the lifeboat. That's the church, the bride of Christ, the body of Christ in which salvation is found. We got to make sure we get there and stay there and be right there until we die. Can you imagine what the wealthy people tried to do? Survivors told that they would try to connive and buy. It was women and children first in the lifeboats. They tried to buy a seat in the lifeboat. Wealth doesn't matter when it comes down to that. I wasn't there. I've only got pictures, images, maybe artist drawings. Can you imagine when it broke apart? 46,000-ton unit breaking apart and the pieces start sinking. And the people that didn't want to get in the lifeboat were about to die. The people that had gone from America to Southampton just for the ride were about to die. It is said about the Strausses, Albert Strauss, the man, would not get on a lifeboat, even with his wife. And then the wife got off of the lifeboat. She didn't want to die without him. But it's too late. The words "too late" should cause shivers all over our body. God has prepared a plan by which we can be saved. God has even said, I want you to live with me eternally. And God even gave his only begotten Son to die to make that possible. Dare we not listen? Dare we not put a passionate, obsessed viewpoint of the value of my soul and preparing for eternity? May God help us. On a Sunday afternoon, you're so kind to be here. You've listened so well. But maybe with these crude illustrations, it will intensify our longings for home. When our soul can stand before God and him, in essence, words to this effect saying, your mansion is ready. It's prepared for eternity. The good brother is going to come and lead us in a song of exhortation. If there's any way that we can help, please give us that honor of praying with you, encouraging you, helping you obey the gospel, whatever the need may be, that you might one day go to heaven. Won't you come as we